The Second Year, Part 3. There were no more sleigh rides for some time, and then one day that was really warm, they drove the 4 miles to see their good friends, the Boasts. Mr. and Mrs. Boast lived by themselves on their farm. They had no children and could hardly make a fuss enough over Rose. When at last the visit was over, and Mr. Boast was standing by the buggy to see them start, he started to speak. Then he hesitated, and finally said in a queer voice, "If you folks will let me take the baby in to Ellie for her to keep, you may take the best horse out of my stable there and lead it home." Manly and Laura were still in astonishment, and Mr. Boast went on, "You folks can have another baby. We can't. We never can." Manly gathered up the reins, and Laura said with a little gasp, "Oh, no, no. Drive on, Manly." As they drove away, she hugged Rose tightly. But she was sorry for Mr. Boast, as he stood still where they had left him, and for Mrs. Boast waiting in the house, knowing, she was sure, what Mr. Boast was going to propose to them. The rest of the winter passed quickly. There were no more storms, and the weather was warm for the season. April came, and on all the farms seeding was begun. On the 12th of April, Manly went down to the barn to hitch up for the afternoon's work. When he went into the barn, the sun was shining warmly, and he had no thoughts of storm. But when the horses were combed and brushed and harnessed, just as he was starting to take them out, there was a crash as if something smashing against the whole side of the barn. Then he heard the shriek of the wind, and looking out could see nothing but swirling snow. A blizzard in April! Why, it was time for spring's work! Manly could hardly believe his eyes. He rubbed them and looked again. Then he unharnessed the team and went to the house. It was quite a little way to go, and nothing whatever could be seen except the swirling snow. But there were things scattered along the path: the cutter, the wagon, the bobsled. Taking his direction from the way each stood as he came to it, he went on to the next and came safely to the porch and the house. Laura was anxiously trying to see from the window to the barn, hoping for a glimpse of Manly coming, but she couldn't see him until the door opened. It was the worst storm of the winter, and lasted 2 days, with no slacking of the wind, which held steadily to its high, wild shriek. But all was snug at the house. The stock were safe and warm in the barn, and following the line of sleds and wagon, Manly managed to get safely to them and back once a day to give them water and fill the mangers. When on the morning of the 3rd day, the sun rose bright and the wind came only in low gusts, it looked a wintry world. A good many people had been caught in the storm, and 2 travelers nearby had lost their lives. While Mr. Bowers was working in his field 2 miles south of town, 2 strangers had come walking from town. They stopped and inquired the way to Mr. Matthews, saying they were friends of his from Illinois. Mr. Bowers pointed out Mr. Matthews' house to them in plain sight across the prairie, and the strangers went on their way. Soon the storm struck, and Mr. Bowers went from the field to his buildings and shelter. The day the storm was over, Mr. Bowers saw Mr. Matthews passing on his way to town and inquired about his friends from Illinois. Mr. Matthews had not seen them, so the 2 went searching for them. The 2 strange men were found in a haystack that stood by itself on the open prairie, considerably off the course they should have followed. They had pulled hay out of the stack and lighted it to make a fire. Then they evidently had given up the idea of keeping warm by an open fire in the wind and snow and had crawled into the hole in the haystack. There they had frozen to death. If they had kept walking, they could have walked out the storm, for it lasted only 2 days. Or if they had been properly dressed, they would not have frozen inside the haystack. But their clothes were thin for springtime in Illinois, and not for a western blizzard. The snow was soon gone again, and spring really came, with the singing of meadowlarks and the sweetness of violets and new grass, as all the prairie turned a beautiful soft green. Laura put Rose in a clothes basket with her tiny sunbonnet on her head and set the basket nearby while she and Manly planted the garden. The old dog Shep was gone. He never had become reconciled to Rose, but was always jealous of her. One day he went away and never came back, and his fate was never known. But a friendly stray St. Bernard, a huge black dog, had come to the house and had been adopted in Shep's place. The St. Bernard seemed to think his special job was to watch over Rose, and wherever she was, there he would be curled around her or sitting up close against her. The cook stove was moved into the storeroom, leaving the other room cooler for hot weather. And in the summer kitchen, Laura worked happily, with Rose and the big black dog playing or sleeping on the floor. There could be no horseback riding safely with a baby, but Laura did not miss it so much, because Manly fastened a dry goods box in front of the road cart, leaving just enough room for Laura's feet at the end where the driver sat. When the work was done after dinner, Laura would hitch Barnum to the road cart, and with Rose in her pink sunbonnet sitting in the box, would drive away wherever she cared to go. Sometimes just to town, but more often to see her Ma and the girls. At first, Ma was afraid to have Rose travel that way, but soon she became used to it. Although Barnum was a fast driver, he was as gentle as a kitten, and the cart on its two wheels was light and safe. Rose could not fall out of the box, and Laura was a good driver. She never had a moment's uneasiness with Barnum hitched to the road cart. And Manly didn't care how often she went, just so she came home in time to get supper. With housework, garden work, caring for and driving with Rose, the summer soon passed, and it was haying time again. Now Rose sat in the shelter of a windrow of hay and watched while Laura drove Skip on the bull rig. Laura and Manly both liked to stay out in the sunny hayfield, and leaving Rose asleep with the big dog watching over her. Laura sometimes drove Skip and Barnum on the mowing machine while Manly raked hay with Fly and Trixie. There were no threshers to cook for this fall, for the renters on the tree claim had the threshing done. The yield of grain was not nearly so much as it should have been. The season had been too dry, and the price of wheat was lower, only 50 cents a bushel. Still, there was money enough to pay all the interest and some of the smaller notes, those for the mowing machine and horse rake and for the sulky plow, and the first payment was made on the harvester. There was still the wagon note and the $500 due on the house and the $800 mortgage on the homestead. Seed must be kept for the next sowing, taxes must be paid, the coal must be bought, and they must live until after the next harvest. There would also be the hay again, and this year there would be 2 steers to sell. They were nice, large 2-year-olds, and they would sell for $12 each. $24 would help buy groceries. They hadn't done so badly considering the season. The 25th of August had come again, and this winter and summer were the second year.